Hey everybody, thank you for pulling on into the Palmetto Pit Stop. I'm Tony here with Adam. Big recap coming up from the Cookout Southern 500s. Just like their burgers, the race, it got a little bit, of course, toasty. It got hot and heated at the end, but you know what? Finding a way into the playoff. Chase Briscoe just edging out Bush there at the end. A lot of action here in South Carolina. Good old Darlington, the lady in black. Adam, you were actually at the track. I was not. I had to work. But what'd you think of that race?
Well, you said it best when you said hot action on the track. It was hot at the race, too.
Yeah, it was muggy.
Yeah, we were sweating. It was, even into the night, it was brutal. But it was a lot of fun. First Crown Jewel race, first night race. It was a sold-out crowd, great energy, and getting to see just a great race, especially towards the end where it came down to the final turn on who would get in and who was out. Yeah, it was great. I loved it. I can't wait to go back. I'm glad that we have the opportunity to go to a track so historic like that around here.
And the fact that it's so close, too. I love this just nice little hour drive away. You know, it's unfortunate I couldn't be there with you guys, but truly happy you had a great time and really got to feel that energy of the night at Darlington. You know, we got to see, of course, the earlier race this year during the day on Mother's Day. You know, fun, great time there. Still, hot day as it is, as we know here in South Carolina, but a lot to get to, things to break down. The playoff field is set, and we're getting at it.
Yeah, so the energy was there right from the beginning because I said last week that Martin Truex Jr. was basically locked in. He would need a catastrophic day. He had a catastrophic day, and about as catastrophic as it can be. Wrecked on the third or fourth lap right at the beginning, and he's lucky that Ryan Blaney was scored below him because he made it in by 1 point. So that could have been his day. And when it happened, I remember I turned to my sister. I was like, this is huge. This is massive for the playoffs. And if Martin Truex, just last race of the regular season, gets eliminated on a third or fourth lap crash, that would have been massive in his final point season, or his final full-time season. So it set the tone early. And speaking of setting the tone early, Bubba Wallace started on the pole, led a few laps at the beginning, but it was a Kyle Larson clinic for most of that race. I think he led, over almost 300 laps of that thing. There was very rarely a time where you looked up and Kyle Larson wasn't in front. So, but in typical Kyle Larson fashion, didn't end up finishing it off. Just once that spin happened in the third stage with Carson Hocevar, that was what really set everything into motion. You had the big crash that took out Bubba Wallace, ended his playoff run. You set up Josh Berry to make an incredible move. Or excuse me, not Josh Berry. He was involved in that crash with Bubba Wallace. But Chase Briscoe, that incredible move, sending it 3 wide for the lead and pressuring Larson to let out and taking it away. I mean, in Stuart Haas's last year, and when their team's been on such a decline, sadly, leading to their exit from the sport at the end of the season, to have a race like that where when you've had opportunities slip away from you, to make one happen, especially for Chase Briscoe, it has to feel great.
It really does. I would imagine so, especially being able to hold on to that wind at the end there. And this is something as we've gone on, and we've seen a lot of surprising finishes. You know, maybe not some more surprising than others. Of course, Burton winning in the last race, but still just trying and so much falling short of that win to get into the playoff has been, Bush. And it's really been tough on him. And, of course, even out of the gate with Martin Truex and just all of these, more household names, these guys going through some of these struggles at the late stages of these races. And, of course, that's going to rub some fans the wrong way. But, what can you do? It's just the luck of the draw. Things happen in these races. A lot of chaos in South Carolina. And on this track that's too tough to tame, it's something we saw again.
Yeah, I want to really put Chase Briscoe on a pedestal for that's his second career win in the Cup. He had a very unfortunate circumstance happen when he won in the Xfinity Series back during the COVID season, where he won at Darlington but wasn't truly able to celebrate The fans weren't there, but of course the story of his wife unfortunately having the miscarriage. So being able to win the Southern 500 and hold his son now, and with his wife able to celebrate him with twins on the way, that seems like such a good. If that is the final win for Stewart-Haas Racing, I don't think there's one that could be more emotional. You could just feel how important this race was. Once it was over, it seemed like it was bigger than the playoffs, even though the playoffs are what everyone's focused on with that winning in. So it's such a great story for Chase Briscoe. So I'm glad that, if the guys I was rooting for, because at the end, watching Kyle Busch through his whole career in his prime, when he was getting towards the end, I was rooting for him a bit. But seeing Chase Briscoe pull it off was incredible. We haven't seen Stewart-Haas race like that in a while.
And there you go. They got the win, wrapped things up at the Cookout Southern 500. But on the tail end of this and more into the meat of the pack, going back to a lot of the wrecks and everything that's gone into this race, it's just something that has provided a good shakeup now looking into playoff season. And as we continue to look over it, some guys on the outside looking in with Buescher, with Bubba Wallace, and just a lot of that cutoff line being, a tough thing for some of these drivers. And, when you're on the outside looking in, you just got to, of course, suck it up, try to, finish out the season strong. You're going into these playoff races, maybe try to pick up a win or two. But as we get into it now, the playoff field is set, and we are going to be working on breaking this down.
Yeah, so the race official standings for the playoff field, Kyle Larson, Christopher Bell, Tyler Reddick, your regular season champion, so he'll get those bonus points going forward. William Byron, Ryan Blaney, Denny Hamlin, Chase Elliott, Brad Keselowski, who won at Darlington in the spring.
Yep.
Joey Logano. And then we get into some of the wild ones of Austin Cindric, Daniel Suarez, Alex Bowman, of course, Chase Briscoe, Harrison Burton, and then the two who points their way into the playoffs, Ty Gibbs, Martin Truex Jr. just barely hanging on to that last spot by the thinnest margin you possibly can, and in possibly the most heart-throbbing way you can get into the playoffs, just hoping that they're just going to have just enough points to get through, which is, I believe, by the end of the second stage is when he locked his way in, so he could take that deep breath. But unfortunately, same can't be said. Chris Buescher had a fantastic season, very consistent. Not enough, sadly. Too many different winners. Bubba Wallace, he was heartbroken after that, as was Ross Chastain. So 3 big guys, and of course Kyle Busch, who these last few weeks he looked like prime Kyle.
Yeah, he was right there. He was right there going for these races, trying to fight for that win. Just so shy of the cusp. And as we talked about last week, now going into this week, great stories for some guys that locked themselves into the playoffs by getting the win, but for a big household name like Busch, just falling short. Very tough for him, very tough for his fans. As we look on now, he is on the outside looking in of the playoff field.
Yeah, and you have to feel for some of these guys eliminated. Chris Buescher, I think, is the one that, even though I pull for Bubba Wallace, Chris Buescher has to be the one that hurts the most out of all of these. Because you had Kyle Busch. He had last lap pass with Harrison Burton at Daytona. That takes it away from him. He was chasing down Chase Briscoe. Maybe if he had a few more laps, maybe he can do something. But Chris Buescher, the closest finish in NASCAR history at Kansas. That separates him from the playoffs. 1/1000th of a second separated him from the playoffs.
Yeah, he's been on a bad side of luck factor going into this year, between coming up short for wins and just right on the outside looking at points. So he's really felt just that bad luck cloud hovering over him for a good portion of the season.
It really has been, and it's not as though he's even been in bad positions. It's just not. He should be in the playoffs on points, but in the system that rewards winning you're in, it just takes away from a guy who you can consistently see up front.
Yeah.
And of course he had that race going in at Darlington that we saw in May, where he was leading it. He made a great move on Keselowski and Reddick while they were battling, and it looked like he should have won. But then Tyler Reddick tries a dive bomb, doesn't work. They get into the wall. The both of them end up a few laps down at the end of the race, and when Keselowski won. And he was upset. He said in that he confronted Tyler Reddick after the race, and he said, "We don't have that sticker on our car," and that ended up being the difference maker. If he can maybe outrun Tyler Reddick, even if he doesn't win, he finishes second. That's still a lot of points that they missed out on just there alone. So maybe it's I feel so bad for the guy, but you have to take these, especially with who they are. Kyle Busch, Chris Buescher, Bubba Wallace, Ross Chastain. These guys are competitors week in and week out. Kyle Busch, of course, a instant Hall of Famer if he retired tomorrow. 2 championships, over 60 wins. A guy that's no doubt, he has the most wins in NASCAR history across all series. But of course, we have Buescher, Wallace, and Chastain, who are these guys who are like week in and week out. You're not going to see them like Kyle Larson, Denny Hamlin, now Tyler Reddick regularly competing for the wins. But you'll see them up there for top 10s. They'll be up there trying to get stage points. And I think that not having them competing for a championship, that's just going to make their performances kind of swept under the rug. I mean, Bubba Wallace, 23-11 in general, this summer has been insane. And Bubba Wallace has been on the bad end of some bad luck because he's been involved in wrecks that have nothing to do with him. He's been racing as best as he can, and Daytona caught up in a wreck, still finished 6th. Darlington caught up in a wreck, gets spun at the Chicago Street Course by Alex Bowman, where he's not great on road courses, but he could have had a great day there, ended up finishing outside of the top 10. Could have had a great points day there, but some of these things are out of their hands. But you also have to look at early in the season when you have these pit issues. I mean, he could have possibly made a run at Richmond in the spring, but then his crew has an issue. He gets stuck on the jack, so they have to put him back up and then get him back out there. He finishes 17th when he was running 5th before that last caution. So Denny Hamlin mentioned it on his podcast that he and his team, hopefully going forward, they realize the importance that you can't just punt on these races early in the season because, say, Chase Briscoe, I keep wanting to say Josh Berry. I was really hoping my prediction would come right from last week.
I know.
But I get one of these. I've gotten half correct so far. So
half correct, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm on, adding up, I have one correct prediction.
We've been close. But, I mean, some of my guys have been close. I haven't hit it right on the nail, right on the head, but we've still been relatively solid with some of the guys we picked.
Yeah, I've gotten halves. I said there would be a chaos first winner with Austin Dillon at Daytona, but ended up being Harrison Burton. I said Josh Berry was my wild card win for Darlington. His teammate Chase Briscoe takes it. But these points, the playoffs, every point matters, and it sucks that these guys aren't going to be included because I think the playoffs would be better with Buescher, Wallace, Chastain, and Busch.
Of obviously. Course, but you got to win. There's only so much room, and you can't just have half the field being in the playoff. You got to have a cutoff somewhere, and 16 seems like a fair number with the number of drivers that are out there.
Yeah, unfortunate, but that's the system. They knew the rules going in. Kyle Petty did make a point where he said it wasn't as though these rules were put in place last week. They knew what they needed to do. And these drivers have been in position. Chastain was racing for it on the end, towards the end of that race anyway, at Darlington, and they made the decision to stay out on older tires. And at Darlington, fresh tires, even by just 11 laps, make all the difference, which we saw. But hopefully next year we'll see these guys in there battling for the championship. I think any of them really, if they get on the right path, just hit strokes of luck, get some wins in the playoffs. You could see one of these guys as a future champion on a Ryan Blaney path. No one thought Ryan Blaney would win the championship last year, but he wins the Coke 600, gets into the playoffs, wins Talladega, wins Martinsville, doesn't win Phoenix, but he finishes better than the rest of the field, and he ends up champion. So I think a guy like Buescher, Wallace, Chastain, they could easily do that. So guys on the outside looking in, if they can just take what they learned from this year, the heartbreak you saw on social media, Bubba Wallace after the race head down on his car, Ross Chastain watching Chase Briscoe celebrate, just using that hopefully as fuel, their Stephon Diggs moment basically, just watching somebody else's victory. Well, you have to use that for the future.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, at least they won't be sitting at home. Obviously, you're still going to be a part of the races. So that's one thing in NASCAR. At least you do get to finish out the season. It's not like you're just seeing these 16 drivers out there on the track and everyone else is literally sitting on their couch at home. So you do still get to be out there, get to show your stuff out on the track, and everything you do is still going to be factored into how the season ends. It's just tough to be on that outside looking in. And honestly, even want to give a quick shout out to McDowell as well. I feel like he was really coming on strong the last few races. Again, a couple bad wrecks, especially a few weeks ago. Getting
Daytona.
just up in the air. She had T-boned when getting into it with Logano. So he's definitely had a tough go of it as well with some of that bad luck factor. Going towards the end of the regular season.
Yeah, he could have stolen one. He had the lead going into the trial at Talladega before that crash happened and Tyler Reddick stole the win. He was leading at Daytona, so he's a good guy on restricted plate tracks. His first career win was the Daytona 500 in 2021, so look for him next year too. He's a consistent plate racer, and with the way the playoffs are built, especially next year with Talladega in a round of 8, wouldn't be surprising. He won on the Indy road course last year, so he can get it done on plate tracks. He can get it done on road courses, and as long as the Roval is a part of the playoffs, that's going to be a difference maker. So speaking of the playoffs, though, we look ahead to Atlanta, and we're doing our little bracket challenge, our March Madness fitting, since Tyler Reddick won the regular season championship. His part owner, of course, Michael Jordan, taking a little inspiration from the basketball world. We're doing our own little brackets for the playoffs. The round of 16, who we're predicting gets eliminated. This round of 16, 3 racetracks, of course: Atlanta, Watkins Glen, and Bristol. I have a few that they might be surprising, some might not be. I'll get the, I'd say, predictable one out of the way. I think Harrison Burton's a first round knockout. Before his win at Daytona, he was last in points in the regular season drivers. He could steal it at Atlanta, but there's a lot of other drivers that could steal it at Atlanta. So I just don't see him. If he doesn't get it done, I don't see him performing well enough at Watkins Glen and Bristol to survive that first cut. Second, maybe a little less surprising, Alex Bowman. So Alex Bowman won at the Chicago Street Course, but ever since, he had a top 5 at Pocono, but he hasn't had a top 10 since those races. And he doesn't have great averages at Watkins Glen or Bristol or Atlanta. I think Bowman, and with the rumors that have been coming out that maybe Bowman is kind of in a make-or-break year. I know I believe he signed an extension, so who knows what's going on with Hendrick. But that 48 team could be looking for other talent, and if Bowman can't get it done, or at least make it a round or 2 before elimination, we could be looking at a different driver in that 48, but that's just what's been going around on social media and the like. The next cut I have, a bit of an unfortunate end, Martin Truex Jr. He's just been coasting off his great start. He hasn't had a top 5 since Kansas. He's only had 2 top 10 since the All-Star race. He did have a great run going at Sonoma, probably a top 5 before he ran out of gas. And he could steal one at Watkins, where he's won before, and he performed well at Bristol in the spring. So he would just need to beat who I believe is going to win Bristol. He would have to beat Hamlin, who I believe is going to be on a warpath now that win from the spring was canceled out. I just don't see Martin Truex advancing unless he just kicks into overdrive, basically a reverse Kevin Harvick from last year, and his last season just goes full throttle. And for the final elimination in the round of 16 on my end, I think it will be Joey Logano. It sounds a little surprising, but if you look at his stats, not really. He wasn't really doing well this season. He had his only win through that bizarre race where was that? Nashville, where there was like 6 restarts. He hasn't done well at Bristol in the next gen car. Hasn't had a top 5 since 2019. He hasn't won at Watkins Glen since 2015, and he's been all right in the next gen, but so I just don't see him in a down year these last 2 years since he won his championship. Just hasn't been all there, but by no means do I think that'll be a persistent occurrence, I think Joey Logano will rebound in the next season or two. But he is my last pick to get eliminated in the round of 16.
Okay, 3 of those are the same as me. So that's not surprising, yeah, just the way that things have shaken out here. But from everything that I've looked over, breaking things down more at the bottom of the top 16, yeah, I'm right there with you on Truex. I don't think he's going to be able to rebound just the way that he's been racing towards the end of the season. You know, he's had a lot of rough goings at it. Not necessarily saying, oh, he's just been on a downward slide, but definitely start out the season better. And unless he's just going to pull some, magic, pull a rabbit out of the hat, something like that at the end of the season, I do see him getting eliminated in the first round. Burton, of course, as well. Right there with you on that one for all the same reasons. For my other two, of course, same thing that you said. Bowman, I have him out as well. The only one I have different, don't have Logano out. I think he's going to be a little bit stronger. At least from what I've looked at so far. My other pick was Cindric to be out. Cindric. Yeah, to be out in the first round. I think it might be a little bit tight between drivers such as Logano, Cindric, Briscoe as well, but he would be my pick from just what I've seen towards the end of the season. It's not necessarily, again, truly big one way or the other. I think it's still going to be very tight between these drivers, but he would be my first one out in the other group of 4. Only one different, again, between you with Logano and me with Cindric. And again, the other 3 being Burton, Briscoe, or Bowman, of course, sorry, and Martin Truex Jr.
Yeah, I was between those two in that round of 16. The only thing I give a leg up to Briscoe, he always seems to run well in Atlanta. Of course, Joey Logano had a win in the spring race last year at Atlanta, but I'm giving the edge to Austin Cindric, and he's also does pretty well at road courses, so I gave the edge to him. If it's a swap and Joey Logano advances and Briscoe is eliminated, I wouldn't be surprised. But, excuse me, I'm saying Briscoe. I meant Cindric. I've been meaning Cindric on that. Cindric has always done well at the new Atlanta pavement. He does well at road courses. If you swap Briscoe, why do I keep saying Briscoe? If I swap Cindric and Logano on the elimination, I wouldn't be surprised. But those are who I have. Of course, we have the same 3, with the only difference being Tony thinks Cindric will be eliminated. I think Joey Logano will be eliminated. Moving on to the round of 12, which is Kansas, Talladega, and the Charlotte Roval.
All right.
I believe the first elimination I have listed is Daniel Suarez. He kind of picked it up at the end of the season. We saw him on a great strategy at Richmond, which I hope that when we go to another short track like Bristol in the round of 16, we'll see those soft tires return. But Daniel Suarez, I just don't know if he'll be able to point his way through. Talladega is going to be a bloodbath, especially in the playoffs. We've always seen it. People will do anything for that win. That win ended up deciding the champion last year, advancing Ryan Blaney, or at least assisted in it. I don't know if Daniel Suarez will be able to point his way through, and I just don't see it happening, sadly, for Daniel Suarez. Austin Cindric is my next pick, but I'm still a little iffy. I know I said Austin Cindric would be my half on Joey Logano. Austin Cindric could possibly advance through this, and I'm thinking it's because of Talladega and the Roval. So he is a great super speedway racer. He can get it done. We saw it. His first win was the Daytona 500. He always does well at Atlanta. So if he's leading laps, winning stages there, and he does the same at Talladega, and of course the Roval, he can do well at, not restrictor plate races. If he does well at road courses, which he always tends to do, tends to at least be competitive, I think it comes down to if he survives Talladega. But because of that toss-up, I'll say that Austin Cindric is eliminated. Next guy I have on my list is Brad Keselowski. I'm eliminating a lot of Fords in these first few rounds, which I feel is a bit indicative of what they were at the beginning of the season, just wondering if they could win, and then now Ford, of course, having the most cars in the playoffs. But I just think Keselowski, he's going to need to rely heavily on Talladega. Of course, we've only seen him win one race since going to the 6 as an owner-driver. But I think he should put all the house money at Atlanta and Talladega. These other four tracks, I'm not too certain of for him, but I think he gets eliminated as well. And then the final elimination in the round of 12, again, it's going to come down to the Talladega and the Roval in the round of 12, and I think it's Chase Briscoe. As much as I, grew up a Tony Stewart fan, I would love to see Stewart-Haas go all the way. And he did make it he made it pretty far in 2022 in the playoffs, but I don't know if he can recapture that magic in Stewart-Haas's final season. My four in the round of 12 getting eliminated, of course, Daniel Suarez, Austin Cindric, Brad Keselowski, and Chase Briscoe.
All right, all pretty reasonable, and a couple the same as anticipated going through this list. I still have Mr. Logano in there again, continuing, so not a pick for me, but my picks here to have the second round out will be Keselowski, so same reasons again as you went over. Could easily see him falling short with everything going on here. I don't think Suarez is going to be able to, track it up enough with points either. He's been there, he's been very solid throughout the year, but he's still been in more of these races, a lot of the middle of the pack. Obviously he had that win to make sure he secured himself a playoff spot, but I think he's going to fall short. So again, falling short, I think it's going to be Keselowski, Suarez, and then also Ty Gibbs and Chase Briscoe are going to be my four falling out in the second round. I really do see, more of the top half of these drivers, even though, of course, there's only so many points separating some of these guys. I just think, these other drivers have been a little bit slower and haven't been, of course, just the upper echelon up near that top 5, top 10 enough to really secure those spots. So one more time for me, it's going to be Keselowski out in the second round, Suarez out, Briscoe, and Ty Gibbs.
All right. Well, I would have to say as we go into the round of 8, which is Vegas, Homestead, and Martinsville, before I get into who I eliminated, I'm going to say this round, at least this season, I think is just tailor-made for Kyle Larson. These are all tracks that he's great at. Hendrick is great at Martinsville.
It's just it's so hard to pick against him. He's just been super, super consistent. No matter any way you're trying to break down these races, he's just always up there.
He's always up there, and he's either winning or he's wrecking while trying. But I don't have him being eliminated. He's in my final four.
Yeah, me too.
But the first driver I have eliminated, speaking of checkers or wreckers, Christopher Bell. I just think he made it to the Final Four last year, and he, unfortunately, to no fault of his own, he was out early in that race too. But this year he's just been way too inconsistent. He can win his way in. I think he easily could do that. But I just think it's too much with the talent that we have in the playoffs of these top 8 drivers remaining. Christopher Bell, I think he's knocked out. William Byron I have as an elimination, which if Austin Cindric could steal something in the round of 12, I think I would put him in Byron's place in the round of 8. So if Austin Cindric doesn't get eliminated in the round of 12, I would have Byron getting eliminated there. But William Byron, he had those wins early in the season, and it looked like he was just going to continue what he was doing last year, which was winning everything on every type of track. But he just hasn't seemed like the same driver. Of course, he's been up there. He's been finishing well, but he has just not been dominating these races like we saw at Martinsville, where all of Hendrick was at the front in Martinsville, and of course he had the Daytona win and his, I believe that was Coda, his win, where Christopher Bell was trying to chase him down. But I think William Byron just. He can put up the points. I just don't know if he's able to move on this year through Vegas, Homestead, and Martinsville. One guy who was eliminated last round in Tony's round of 8, I have Ty Gibbs being locked out of the round of 8. He's still looking for a first career win. It's going to be, like I said, with this remaining field of drivers, I think he's going to have to win. And if he can't, I just don't see a way for him to. He's been good. I'll say that. He's been very consistent. He's taken care of his equipment. He's up there. He's finishing well. I just don't know if he can get to Phoenix without a win. And then the final elimination in the round of 8, Chase Elliott. So he got that win at Texas, and he was leading the points for a good time, but he's sort of fallen off. I don't know if that's just the tracks they've been going to. I don't know if that's team performance or what, but Chase Elliott, I just think he makes it far, but I don't think he's chasing a second championship this year.
I have him missing the cut as well, but by the slimmest of margins. He would actually be my number 5 pick, but I do have him on the outside looking in. So Chase Elliott, yes, I have him getting eliminated here. I've had Joey Logano hanging in there. He's been hanging in there, but I have him getting bumped out as well. I think he's going to have run some good races down the stretch and make it into the top 8. But yes, out in the second round for me. Reminder again, Logano, Elliott getting bumped out, and then also last name with the B. You are going to be bumped out unless your last name is Bell. I have Bell keeping it in there, but Byron and Blaney I have on the outside looking in. I just really like with these point standings how they've been running towards the end of the year. Just the consistency up near the front with some of these races. I would really not want to pick against anyone like Larson and Reddick as well. Going towards the end of the season, so I have them both in for me. Obviously, we can talk about our final 4s in just a second, but one more time. Out for me, I have in this round of 8 will be William Byron, Ryan Blaney, Chase Elliott, and Joey Logano. So our final 4s, I think, relatively similar, but when you're getting down and just analyzing how some of these guys have been running, who maybe has a little bit more of a chip on their shoulder, who's been really consistently close to the top 5, it doesn't take some rocket science to try and pick who's going to be there without some crazy things or wrecks happening at some of these tracks, which, of course, could shake up anything.
Yeah, especially when we have basically 2 super speedways on the schedule with Talladega and Atlanta, and then the road courses are really going to throw a wrench in things because not all these drivers are road course ringers like Jeff Gordon were and Tony Stewart were back in the day. So it could easily be about stealing a race here and there. My championship 4, I believe Denny Hamlin. He's going to try to finally get his championship. I think I don't know how he'll be able to overcome that points deficit off that penalty from the engine, the Bristol engine, excuse me. I think he does get it done at Bristol. I think he's great. He won Kansas last year. I think he can do it again. He's one of the best, one of the best drafting track drivers out there. So I think Talladega and Atlanta should be no issue for him. He can perform well at the road course with the Roval and Watkins Glen. Vegas, Homestead, Martinsville, I think he can survive those real easy. Hamlin, I think, punches his ticket. We mentioned it earlier. Kyle Larson, that round of 8 is tailor-made for him to make the Final 4. He won Vegas. He dominated Homestead last year before he hit the hit the protective barrels. And Martinsville, you can, as long as you're going to Martinsville in a Hendrick car, you have a good shot at winning. Third, regular season champion. I haven't talked about him much yet, but Tyler Reddick. He's just been super, super, super consistent. He has looked like a reborn driver. He's shown flashes in the past with RCR and last year at 2311. Tyler Reddick has come alive. We're seeing what he can be. We're seeing how good he is. I mean, finishing in the top 10 when you are sick as a dog in your own version of the flu game racing for MJ. I don't think there's any question in my mind that Tyler Reddick will not sail, because it's going to be a tough stretch to make it through all these rounds of the playoffs, especially surviving these tougher tracks. But he's skilled on the 1.5 miles. He's skilled on the road courses. He can get it done. I think he gets to Phoenix with limited amounts of stress. And my finalist is the defending champion, Ryan Blaney. I think he can just put himself in a good position. Ford has been really picking it up, and I think he is Ford's best driver right now. Obviously, defending champion. And he's proven that he can, when he's not caught up in something like he was at Darlington, I think he can get it done at these tracks. He's won Talladega twice, just since I've really been watching again. He can get it done. Hey, excuse me. He can get it done at these short tracks, hold it together. Ryan Blaney, again for me. Ryan Blaney, Tyler Reddick, Kyle Larson, and Denny Hamlin as my final 4 this year.
So all reasonable picks, and we hold the same opinions for a lot of these guys. Larson, it's just a no-brainer. It just really is. It's so tough to pick against a guy, and there's just no reason for it. So obviously he's going to be in my Final Four because it would just take something more astronomical and a lot of bad luck for him not to be there. He's just been way too consistent, always been having great runs. He spent a lot of time as the lead lap runner through this year. So he's up there, of course, for me. I do like Bell, and this is, of course, is where we're on the fence. You having Blaney over my pick Bell, but he's just had some fantastic runs as well. He's been in the top 5 consistently. I think he's just had a couple little shaky moments where he hasn't been able to just jettison himself up to the front, but he could smell it. He's right there. So I got Larson, Bell, Reddick, of course, no question, just because of how consistent he's been. He's had some incredible races, just even coming off, as you said, his own version of the flu game. Like, what a just fantastic way to show how bad you want to be out there, how bad you still want to try and win a race, or at least finish your race, closing things out in Darlington. Regular season champion, always going to be tough to bet against as we're going down the stretch here. To go towards the end of the season. But yeah, Hamlin as well, one of the old standbys. He's been someone you've been watching for a long time and has maybe a little bit of a chip on his shoulder at this point. And I do feel like he's been, just getting to the point, closer and closer towards the tail end of his career. He's had a lot of great wins, but seeking that title. And he, I think, is going to be, even though he's not, of course, a spring chicken, not one of the youngest guys out there, but he's going to be as hungry as anyone out there on that track. So, I do look to see him really putting his heart into this. So my Final Four got Hamlin, Reddick, Bell, and Larson.
Yep, and if I have to choose, I am going with someone who's done it before. It's Ryan Blaney. I think he goes back-to-back, which is not something we've seen in this playoff format, at least none that come to mind immediately. This format was designed to prevent these dynasties like we saw with Jimmy Johnson winning 5 in a row. But I think Ryan Blaney, he just needs to win at the right time, and he's done. He's won at the right time, and now he's just looked better than ever, I think. So I think Ryan Blaney defends his title and finally makes people stop calling it an illegitimate title, as they have, because some people have been saying it was real evident of the way this playoff style is built, that he just kind of found himself in the right place at the right time. Maybe that's true. I don't know, but I think if you win twice back to back, I don't think you can really detract from the kind of driver he is, which he shouldn't be anyway. Ryan Blaney's very talented, and I think he proves it with a second championship this year.
Back to back. All right. A bold prediction there, but not so bold. I wouldn't be surprised to see him up there. I'd be slightly more disappointed because it would make my bracket lesser, but that's okay. I still very, very respectable pick. He's had an incredible year for Team Penske. So, my pick for the title, and even just try not to be too biased. I've really been in between two guys. I know that Hamlin's going to be up there. I know that Bell will be trying to vie for it, but it was really a struggle, at least from thinking of who's going to take it this year between Larson and Reddick. Even though Reddick just with this, newfound success with, 23-11, really rising his way to the top, making a name for himself, continuing to make a name for that team. I am a Reddick fan, so the bias is a little bit shown through here, and I don't want to do it. I didn't want to do it, but he's going to be my pick. Regular season champion, he's my playoff champion as well for 23-11 racing. Tyler Reddick, I'm picking him to take home the title with Larson a close second.
I don't think it would be... I know it'll be seen as bias, but Tyler Reddick's he's been hot. He's been great. He's been fantastic. So if he's holding that trophy at the end of the year, I don't think anybody's surprised. And that would mean Denny Hamlin gets a trophy as an owner, which would be a little ironic that
right.
that he gets his first championship as an owner rather than a driver. But I think he'd take that anyway.
Yeah, it's like, there you go. It still counts. And so he's got 2 shots to win the title here between himself as a driver or as an owner. So there you go. Unique situation.
Yeah, very unique. But I think... yeah, Reddick and Blaney, so we'll have a guy going for his first championship with Reddick or defending a back-to-back bout for Ryan Blaney. So we look ahead now to Atlanta, and it's always a good race at Atlanta, especially this new pavement.
Hotlanta.
Hotlanta, and it's probably gonna be Hotlanta, being now we're in September.
There's some 80s. It'll be a little reasonable into September. Much better than the middle of July going into August.
Oh yeah, well they'll be there next year in the summer, so right in the middle of it, I can only imagine what those races are gonna be like.
Pouring sweat.
Yeah, pouring sweat. Or if it's like last year's summer race, pouring rain.
Oh yeah, I mean that's fair. Yeah, but of course can't be racing in that. So
yeah, but I think looking ahead to that, Atlanta is going to be a huge, huge toss-up. I think Atlanta is a little less like Daytona or Talladega. It's not a wide open surface like Talladega and Daytona. There isn't as much room. Obviously, it's a mile and a half as compared to a 2.5 or 2.6 mile super speedway like these other ones that we've seen traditionally. I think it's going to show just who really is the best at these drafting tracks. I could see Austin Cindric leading a ton in this race. I think Denny Hamlin could. These last few races, he's been a little iffy on his luck, but you should be able to see him up there just the way he's looked at Talladega and Daytona. Atlanta, I think, shouldn't be an issue for him. Tyler Reddick, of course, he's done well. Ryan Blaney finishing third in this. He finished second in the spring race in that close finish with Kyle Busch and the winner Daniel Suarez. If I make a prediction, I'll do my top three here. I think Austin Cindric will be my wild card. I think I don't know if I can call a wild card a playoff,
at this point, right?
A playoff driver as a wild card, but I think Austin Cindric, he's just been so close. He's made some good moves. He's taken care of things at Atlanta. He just hasn't been able to finish it off. He's won at Daytona. I think Austin Cindric would be one of my top three to finish this off. To punch his ticket into the next round. That is what my predictions were banking on. I think Austin Cindric gets it done. My number two, I think Kyle Busch gets a bit of a consolation prize. I think he finishes off what he wasn't able to do in the spring. I think Kyle Busch can maybe get a win just to keep that streak going. He's been so close, and it looked like ever since Richmond, it looks like Richard Childress Racing is just angry, and they are just going for it now. So they've given him some good cars, was up there at Daytona, was there at the end at Darlington. Won't be surprised to see him if he can finish it off in victory lane in Atlanta. And then my final one, another consolation prize. Surprisingly, my first prediction for someone I would have a bias for, Tyler Reddick. I think Tyler Reddick can get it done.
All right.
Of course, I would pull for the 2311 guys. I pull for the Toyotas. I think Tyler Reddick can keep this hot streak going. I think he's going to keep it going all the way to the championship round at least. I think he can finish it off at Atlanta. He's won Talladega, so we can see he can at least be there at the end, and sometimes that's all it takes. So my three, Kyle Busch gets his consolation. Tyler Reddick punches his ticket to the next round with minimal sweat, and wild card pick of Austin Cindric winning it.
All right, all reasonable as we get into the hot Atlanta race. I think it is going to be, pretty tight with some of these playoff drivers up near the front. I'm not going to pick Reddick in this one just to limit my bias a little bit. I do think he's going to be up there near the top five, but I won't pick him for this one since I had him as my pick for the overall championship. But my three, and I will start with my wild card. Going through, I talked about it a little bit earlier in the podcast. McDowell going through some tough struggles with bad luck, but he's been trying to find his way up near the front. He, maybe been trying to be a little bit more risky, trying to navigate through the field. I think he does get it done as a wild card pick. So that's going to still be more my outside looking in. Obviously not in the playoff field, but I'm going to have him taking it home at Atlanta. And for my other two picks will be both playoff drivers. And for me, it's going to be Larson. I think that, of course, as we've talked about many times already, up near the front. He is going to be up fighting for that lead, and I think he could actually hold on to it, get it done with his first race of the playoffs, and then just with that chip continuing to grow on his shoulder, being really hungry, winning that championship, I think Hamlin is going to be getting the win in Atlanta as we go into what is going to be a fantastic playoff start. I think a lot of these guys, again, are going to be getting really tight up near the front, but my picks, again, Larson, no surprise, Hamlin, and then more of a wild card pick outside looking in, not in the playoff, McDowell finding a way to get the win in Atlanta. More, again, of a consolation prize going into the tail end of the season, but the big kickoff to the playoff season.
Yeah, Atlanta's always great, and that would be McDowell's third career win, and so considering I've watched him since, I believe his rookie season was, 2007, 2008?
Yeah, it's
something like that.
Been a little while.
So to have this career revival, or maybe even this career burst, I guess is the best way to say, just to finally start winning.
Resurgence.
Yeah. It's great to see him, especially with everything I would watch him in the late 2000s. Just always fighting to make the race, basically.
Yeah, just keep making some noise. You're out of the playoff, but keep making some noise. That's the best thing that you could do right now. Same thing for guys, as we talked about before, like Chastain, like Wallace, some younger guys, of course, Buescher. Keep making that noise and try to parlay it into more success next season.
Yeah, and I think some guys looking for their first win could really take advantage of a track like Atlanta. I mean, Ty Gibbs, he could end up winning, getting his first career win. He's good on all tracks, basically. Carson Hocevar has been showing some speed at Spire.
Oh, yeah, young gun.
Yeah. So I think we could see maybe some first-timers, but odds makers do have the opening odds for the top three drivers, all 10-1. Ryan Blaney, Kyle Busch, Joey Logano.
Logano. See, I wanted to pick him too. I wanted to have him in my top three, but I wasn't sure. I was on the fence about that. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see him up there as well.
Yeah, all these guys who know how to race at drafting tracks, they could get it done. Logano's shown it last year. It's just a matter of, can he find the speed? Well, it's not so much speed, more survival. Can he find the holes in the crashes to get to the end at Atlanta? I think a guy like him, if he wins this weekend and destroys our brackets, then
well, I have him hanging in there.
Destroys my bracket.
Your bracket. I have him going into the top 8. You have him out.
I have him out first round.
So yes. I do think again it could be a good springboard for him. I would anticipate he does race very well in Atlanta from anything I've seen from him over time this season. But yes, would be a little bit of a punch to your bracket for sure.
Yeah, that would be a big hit right off the bat.
Yeah, we'll see.
But, so we've been talking a lot about the playoffs, and I'll be basically taking the microphone for a little bit as we head into the final turn. Everybody and their mother on social media, everyone who's ever voiced their opinion on NASCAR has mentioned how much they mentioned their opinions on the playoffs.
Or have just been getting into NASCAR and are maybe confused about how this all works.
Yeah, and I'll just come out and say it. I hate the playoff system. I hate this win and you're in. I hate these elimination rounds. It makes absolutely no sense to crown a championship in motorsports like this. NASCAR, I believe, unless there's some other championship format out there for motorsports that in a sport I have never watched, NASCAR is the only motorsport with this style of playoff, and that's not a good thing. You don't see them doing this in Formula One, and Formula One has exploded in popularity.
It has
in the last few years.
It has, especially here in the United States.
Yes, and you don't see it there. You have these drivers who go out. Last year, you saw Max Verstappen win everything. He win everything except like one or two races. I think it hasn't been the same this year, where he's actually been on a bit of a drought. But no one questioned when he was winning everything. No one questioned, oh, maybe we should make a playoff style bracket or bracket style elimination format like NASCAR. It's like, oh no, he's just winning everything. Let's just let him win everything and give him the championship because he deserved it. Because he was just good.
Simple enough, right?
Yeah, Red Bull gave him these cars, they gave him these teams, they gave him these engineers to field the best equipment, and they put one of the world's greatest drivers behind it. You deserve to have that. If you can be the best at every position, you should be rewarded for your efforts. And it's frustrating to see these guys like Chris Buescher, who under the Latford system, the Winston Cup format, he'd be fifth. And he's not given the opportunity to fight for a playoff, or for a championship.
And he's probably the one getting affected by this the most. Obviously, some of the guys that have been on that playoff bubble, such as Bubba, but even more so, Buescher definitely is the number one guy on the outside looking in that would really benefit from the old rules. And it's tough to see for someone that's had so much success throughout the season.
Yeah, he has just been consistent. And I don't know... I know NASCAR toyed around with the idea of a playoff in the 90s, and they wanted to implement it for a long, long time. And it was when it took place after Matt Kenseth had this insane season in 2003. He had one win, but he was so consistent that he won the championship with one win, and he basically locked it up with a few weeks ago.
It's just Simmerberg. Some first responders making their way to a call. We have very paper-thin walls. I don't know if you guys could even pick it up on the mic, but there's a couple. I believe it might be an ambulance or maybe some cop cars whizzing by, but you can hear everything.
Yeah, we live
around.
down the road from a police station.
And a fire station. Yeah, so apologies if that made it through the mic. Not sure. Either way, continue, my friends.
Thank you.
Hopefully everyone's all right.
Yeah. So, I get back on track here, refocus my anger. I understand that the Winston Cup system, the Winston Cup format is outdated. And it is. It was formed in the 70s. It started in the 70s. And it was rewarding drivers for just showing up every week. Because at that point, drivers weren't showing up every week. They were showing up when they could. So, and of course, it's at a different time. The races back then, they had like 60 race schedules. And you also had Richard Petty, who could just win 27 of them. But even in, even in a season like that, I saw a Twitter graphic like last year or something where they applied the modern points format and elimination style playoff to every season. And in the season where Richard Petty won 27 races, he didn't win the championship because he would have finished behind someone who made that Final Four. And if there is a flaw in your system where Kyle Larson, for example, he can show up and he can win 35 of 36 races. And he goes to Phoenix and Denny Hamlin finishes in front of him. Denny Hamlin's a champion.
That's it.
That's not a legitimate format.
Now, see, it works a little bit better in team sports, just to that point of, hey, you qualify for the playoff, you play either in a series or, one and done, like college football is going to work, like the NFL works. But it's just a little odd for something such as racing, down the road. At least when you try to compile all these points, so you're talking about how they're earned throughout the year, and seemingly some guys that have raced so well, maybe deserving of winning a title and not being able to have it.
Yeah, I mean, Ryan Newman almost exposed this format in the first year. He didn't win a race in 2014. He finished second. If in the last corner Kevin Harvick blows a tire, Ryan Newman's your champion.
That's it.
With one win in the last race. And they want to make these, the reason they made this system was because they want Game 7 moments. That's what they said. We want our Game 7 moments.
Exactly. Like a playoff series. You're trying to get people more and more invested because when you think about it, we watch baseball, I'll watch hockey, basketball throughout the season, but the regular season, it can be boring. Ratings go down. Not everyone is having their eyeballs glued to the screen, but when you're talking about the playoff energy that comes with these team sports and comes with series, you're getting everyone crazy. You're getting the rally towels going. You're getting folks, just getting out there and tailgating and putting their full fandom on display because it's win or you're done.
Yeah, and there have been some of the greatest moments in sports history have been these Game 7 moments, even in sports where there are no Game 7s. You have the Minneapolis Miracle, a last-second throw to Stephon Diggs to win it for the Vikings. You have Jose Batista. I don't even think that was a Game 7, hitting that home run after a weird inning and flipping the bat.
Yeah.
And NASCAR is not a team. It is a team sport, but it is not a two-team sport.
No.
Every week you can have, this weekend, you have, or let's use the Jets for example. For those who don't know, I'm a fan of loser franchises. So the Jets play the 49ers this week. They play one team. There's going to be a winner and a loser. If the Jets win, they're 1-0. If the 49ers win, they're 1-0. And the other team starts the season with a loss. And things are kind of bracketed that way through 17, 18 weeks. And whoever has the best record, it's sorted on that. And there's tiebreakers, of course. But you can only play who's in front of you. You play one team. Of course, there's 53 players. There's there's the office or the front office. You have the coaches, all that stuff. But it is one team. It is the New York Jets against the San Francisco 49ers. It is not the Jets versus the Bills, the Patriots, the Dolphins, the Niners, the Panthers, all at once. It is one team and one team.
It'd be like, it'd be like a Royal Rumble of like a bunch of football players just throwing fists, throwing guys out of like a steel cage or something.
Yeah,
and that's how you decide the NFL. That's who you decide who wins the Super Bowl.
That's the thing. With NASCAR, you're not racing. It is not Kyle Busch versus Kyle Larson, and then the next week you go to Daytona, and then it's Kyle Busch versus Denny Hamlin, and then you go to Sonoma, and then it's Kyle Busch versus Truex. It is Kyle Busch and 35 other drivers.
I mean, crazy concept, though. Imagine just having two guys, like that's it, the playoff matchups are set, and you just have these two drivers with like a set amount of laps just duking it out for a win. That would be something.
That would be an interesting format. I think they do something like that on those old EA NASCAR games where you do the challenges where you have to beat the one driver.
It would take a while. But
it would, yeah.
It'd be something, though.
You'd have multiple races a day. It'd be similar to drag racing, the way that's bracketed.
Yes.
But this isn't drag racing. So the thing that annoys me is that you are facing all of your competitors 36 times a year. You are not just playing them once when you're scheduled to, or twice if they're in your division, or whatever sport you're looking at with however their division rivalries are set up. You are racing every contestant at all times. It is not the Jets versus 31 other teams. It's not the Yankees versus 29 other teams. It's not the Knicks versus however many teams. The Devils against however many teams. It is you and every team in a motorsport race. You go to the same track, and now with NASCAR, the way it's set up, every team basically has the same car, and you have to find. It is down to talent sometimes, and then just survival. But you just have to get the littlest advantage. But you are racing everybody every single time. You can see people calling other teams frauds in like the NFL. Like last year, people were calling the Eagles frauds because they went the first half of the season doing really well, and then they had that loss against the Jets, and everyone's like, "Oh, frauds, blah blah blah." That is a team that they're calling fraudulent. That is not if the Eagles had went from that and then won the Super Bowl, they'd be like, oh, well, they can't be frauds because they just won the system. They just won the playoffs. They beat the teams in front of them, and the teams in front of them, are the best. Is Kyle Larson beating Harrison Burton as much of a challenge as the Eagles having to play this 49ers for a trip to the Super Bowl on the line? It's much different, and it doesn't make any sense because you are not, especially with the winning in. With the winning in, you are not putting the best drivers in your sport into a playoff.
Not all the time.
Not all the time.
For the most part, especially the upper half, yeah, you probably are. But, a couple guys, that might just happen to sneak a win in there, even though they might be, consistently 30th place or below for most of the year. It happens, and that is the flaw in it.
Yes, you have your Harrison Burton. You have, and no disrespect to these drivers. Obviously, they are the best at what they do.
They're still in NASCAR for a reason. They are still
a NASCAR driver. It is not a small feat to be a NASCAR driver. But you have Austin Dillon, who was at 31st in points when he did what he did at Richmond. You had Austin Cindric, who was in the 20s when he did what he did. You had Harrison Burton, who punched his ticket in, and he's the worst driver who shows up, a full-time driver.
So you're saying he's in the 40s.
Yeah, so if you could be the absolute worst, you could finish dead last every race. You don't even have to show up. But if you race to a win at Daytona, you are taking a playoff spot away from somebody who didn't. And I know that the mantra, especially what like Kyle Petty said, is like, this is how the racing is, and this is the rule set. It's been set in stone since 20 whenever. That's not how motorsports should be. You shouldn't reward. Yeah, I know it's you race to win. You know, you're not first, you're last, like Ricky Bobby. Even Ricky Bobby picked up on that because his owner was annoyed with how much he would wreck his car to win. But if winning's all that's rewarded, then who cares? Because you're not rewarding consistency. We may never see another season like Jeff Gordon in 1998, where he won 13 races and had an average finish of like 5th or something. I mean, you had Kyle Larson in 2010, or excuse me, 2010, in 2021, where he had 10 races.
Pretty young, 2010.
Yeah, he was still a few years from NASCAR.
Yeah, a little bit.
But you have him in 2021, where he won 10 races. He was the dominant driver all year, and he deserved that championship, sure. In 2020, Kevin Harvick won 8-9 races. He didn't even make it to Phoenix. He didn't make it to that last race. He was eliminated. The best driver all year didn't have a chance to run for the championship and had to resort to attempting to spin out Kyle Busch in a race at Martinsville. Excuse me. And it doesn't make sense that these drivers are going out there to win every single week, and things are out of their hand. It just happens. But to just have a system where people debate if the champions of your sport are even the champions of your sport. That is a bad look on how things are. And NASCAR has tried to get that 18 to 30, that golden ticket, basically, that demographic, the 18 to 30-year-old males into their sport. And they can't grab it because they insist that the way to do it is the playoffs. And it's not. Because as much fun as it is to watch these cars race, and it is, that's the reason I got into NASCAR. It's also the reason I stopped watching NASCAR at the same time. When Tony Stewart retired in 2016, I stopped watching every week because it's a stupid system. When it happened, Kyle Busch, in 2015, he missed, 10 races at the beginning of the year, and they were like, well, you have to race every race to make the playoffs. But if you win and you can chart top 30, we'll grant you a waiver. And the waiver is probably one of the worst things that NASCAR could have done. Not because some drivers don't deserve it. Like Kyle Larson this year, when he tried to run the double, he ended up missing the start of the Coke 600, so his points, he was counted as missing the race, and he had to get a waiver, and it took a few days. If they don't grant a waiver to Kyle Larson this year, one of the best drivers on the planet he's just turning laps because he's not eligible for your championship because of the system you put in place where you decide on if you want a guy to compete. So you could have Kyle Larson, who just raced, he lost the regular season championship by 1 point when he missed an entire race. Like, that is a driver that consistent of racing shouldn't come down to a yes or no decision on should we give him this piece of paper to say he can go race for a championship. I think under the old format, he's like in 6th place or something, and that's just the price you pay for missing a race. But he might make the different choice if it's under a full season format. And I understand the Latford system's outdated, but if you just take the modern point system, it is so much easier to explain to someone instead of, well, the leader gets 180 points, or the winner gets 180 or 75 points or whatever, and then 5 points for leading a lap and 5 points for leading the most laps. You get that out of the way. You go first place, 40 points. Second place, 35. Third, 34, 33, all the way down. And if you finish 35th or worse, you get 1 point. That is way easier to explain to someone than, oh yeah, you get this, and then if you can win stages, then you get these amount of points, but it's only depending on what position you finish in. And then if you win, you are locked in and your position doesn't matter. But then when you get to the playoffs, it does matter because then you're at the bottom because you don't have many points. And then you could be in dead last, but you win and you're knocking out someone who's been consistently top 5. It just doesn't make sense to have a championship format where everybody outside of the front office of NASCAR hates it. There are people who say, yeah, I don't want a elimination style. I want 3-3-3-3. It's 12 races, the playoffs. So that way, someone who just blows a tire on lap 2 of Phoenix, that's not their championship hopes going up in flames. It's okay, we'll try to get points and go back at it, wherever. But you have people who say you should have stuck with 2011, their format. 2011 points format, that worked. And you got a Game 7 moment where Tony Stewart barely made the playoffs. And when he did, he was like, I don't deserve to be here. We just haven't been good enough. He wins 5 of 10 races, only wins the championship because he beat Carl Edwards to tie at Homestead, Miami, and he only got the tiebreaker because he won more races than Carl Edwards. You're still rewarding winning, but Tony Stewart doesn't do that unless he goes on this insane tear. And then what do? They get their Game 7 moment, a legendary run. Like Tony Stewart, he was already a great driver to that point. He was, if Tony Stewart retired for some reason in 2010, you have a driver who's like retired in his prime, started his own race, bought his way into a race team with Haas, started Stewart Haas Racing. You have a guy who won X amount of races, however many he had at the time. He won 2 Indy 500s, Brickyard 400s. Won 2 championships. Hall of Fame driver. But this legacy was built on his 2011 championship where, he has 3 championships, but his run in 2011 was legendary. Like, that is insane. And they get their Game 7 moment. And then they do away with it in 2014 with this playoff format because that doesn't matter. You could win 5 races, but if you don't win the last one, it doesn't matter. And then they get another Game 7 moment in 2022 where Ross Chastain is, I think, like 5 points out of the race, or out of the championship finale. And they tell him, you're out. Like, you need X amount of points. And he does something that we've never seen, where he just guns it at the wall at Martinsville and rides the wall, sets a track record, picks up 6 positions, and points his way in. Everyone's freaking out. It's like one of NASCAR's most viral moments because some dude just pulled off what you'd see in the old EA games.
I was going to say, that video was shared. That video was shared a lot.
That was the race that made me start watching NASCAR again. It's like, you have these drivers who are crazy. Like, Ross Chastain, up until, kind of recently, I thought he was nuts, and I loved him for it.
Yeah. Also, great advocate for drunk driving.
Ironically.
Yeah, ironically.
Not because he is intoxicated. He just drives like a maniac sometimes.
But great. He does have, again, just shout out to him, great part that he takes, even here in the state of South Carolina, to advocate for people to not drink when they drive, to be very responsible with alcohol. So, again, a shout out to Mr. Chastain for that.
Yes. But also shout out to him for giving me a prime example of why this format makes no sense, because they get this Game 7 moment, and it doesn't translate into views. No substantial amount of people watched the finale. They saw the video on Twitter and YouTube and Instagram.
Bunch of shares. Bunch of shares online, but a flash in the pan, right?
Yeah, it was a flash in the pan. And what made it even weirder was that they banned the move. So you get 2 Game 7 moments. You get Tony Stewart winning his way to a championship, his 3rd and final championship. You get Ross Chastain basically defying physics and wall riding like you shouldn't be able to do in NASCAR, but he did because of the way these cars are built. He does that, and both times they change the rules so that doesn't happen anymore. So NASCAR really is in a state of want their cake and eat it too, because they want these Game 7 moments, but when these Game 7 moments happen, they get rid of them. So you can't go on a Tony Stewart run. You can't ride the wall. And I understand why you can't ride a wall. Don't get me wrong. It's a huge safety concern. You'd have 36 cars riding the wall at the end of every race just to pick up positions. That's a huge health risk and safety risk. So I understand. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have banned it. But it is weird when you're promoting the playoffs using the wall ride. And again, I know it's your most viral moment, but it's banned. So they've used Atlanta a lot. They've used that 3-wide finish. They've used Ryan Preece's flip. They've used all of these moments, but they're glossing over the fact that they have had their Game 7 moments, but they still don't know how to turn that into that 18 to 30 market. And it has become very clear that the 18 to 30 market and everybody else by that stance doesn't want this elimination style format because it doesn't make sense to have that in a motorsport. NASCAR started declining when their viewership started declining when they introduced this format. It started in the chase. It started in 2005, the first chase. NASCAR had its ratings peak in 2006 and ever since has been chasing that. And you know what it's been? It's because you have this playoff format where a driver like Jimmy Johnson, I don't want to take away from Chad Knaus and Jimmy Johnson, a fantastic, one of the greatest duos in the sport's history. But you have a guy who, he was not a hot prospect. He only was discovered by Jeff Gordon racing in lower series. And they just develop a strategy where they can win races and perform okay in the regular season. Then they get to the last 10 races and they win everything because they have these super, super fast cars. They just knew how to exploit them. It wasn't cheating. Sometimes they got busted for illegal stuff, but most of the time it was just slight modifications. Hendrick has always had what is the word I'm looking for? An engineering advantage. They have a bunch of geniuses at Hendrick. Ray Ernham, Chad Knaus, all these guys.
They just have some very fast cars. I mean, these engines are very well designed and suited to have their guys and to try and keep them up at the front end, and we've, of course, seen that.
Yeah, but at the same time, their biggest success in Jimmy Johnson took away from who probably should have been their biggest success in Jeff Gordon. Because in this format, Jimmy Johnson won 5 in a row, 7 overall. Jeff Gordon, the last time he won a championship was 2001. He raced another 14 years after that, consistently being one of the best drivers. If you didn't watch racing, you knew Jeff Gordon. Everybody knew Jeff Gordon. But because of this format, he should have won 7 championships. And if you have 7 championships with Jeff Gordon, there's no doubt of who the greatest driver of all time is.
Well, yeah, of course.
Because he would be the most dominant driver in 7 seasons. 2 drivers have done that. Richard Petty, where a lot of the drivers didn't even race full time. It's like David Pearson, who won the second most races of all time. He didn't race all the time like Richard Petty. He probably could have dominated Richard Petty. Even Richard Petty said himself the best driver of all time was David Pearson. David Pearson agreed to that statement. But then you have Dale Earnhardt, who is the best of that era. And he's widely seen as the greatest driver of all time because he won 7 championships in a format that rewarded consistent driving. He won a lot of races. He was an icon to this day. And for a sport so ingrained in their history, they have done so much to try to get away from it with this format. Because that is how their champions were crowned. And they have just been, let's go to this gimmick-style playoff. And I don't know how you can crown a champion proudly and promote it, knowing that this championship can be so easily manipulated. Because Ryan Blaney won the championship on 3 races last year, 3 wins, and that's fine. You don't need to win a ton of races. Matt Kenseth won a lot of races. He won 1 race in 2004, and he won the championship. 2003. Forgetting his name, Ryan Blaney won 3. He won the Coke 600, he won the Talladega race, and he won Martinsville. And those 3 punched his ticket. He didn't win Phoenix because Ross Chastain was just dominating that race at the end. He couldn't catch him. But he still won because of where he was positioned. William Byron, he deserved that championship last year. He was insane. He had, I forget how many races he won last year, but he was always at the front. You always heard them talking about him. But because of the system, they didn't give it to him. Same thing with 2020. Kevin Harvick deserved that champion. Kevin Harvick is one of the most affected people by this format. He won 1 championship in 2014 with the format system, but he deserved, throughout the 2010s, deserved to win probably 3 to 4 championships in the old format that rewarded consistency every single week. But what's the point in being consistent every single week if you could literally show up and park the car after 5 laps? But as long as you have a win, you could win the Daytona 500, start and park for 25 races after that, and then just show up for the playoffs with the best cars you've ever made. Why bother wasting the money if that's how you can win a championship?
Well, because you still just want to be out there on the track, and even though most folks, from what we've come to understand, do not understand or really agree with the playoff format. Of course, a lot of folks have understood it. You research it more, and over the course of time, get how everything works with points. Of course, not even your casual fan is going to be able to sit there and say, "Oh yeah, I know 100% to my knowledge exactly how this works, and I know why this guy has so many points and this guy doesn't." But even though, of course, we got to this point, folks, and it's as simply put as this, people are going to still watch it because of how much of a NASCAR fan they've been over time, and just because they love the sport. You love the sport, you still want to support the sport. You might not agree how the playoff system works or how it is at the end of the season, but you still love it, and you love the racing, you love your driver, and you want to support them no matter what, even though inside you're like, I wish it could be done differently.
Yeah. And that's the thing, sadly, because there are fans like me who watched. I started watching in 2007. That's how many different point systems? You had the 2007, you had 2011, you had 2014. So 3 to 4 different points, 3 or 4 different ways to decide a champion. And they haven't changed the way you decide the Super Bowl. Granted, they've added the ways, like the amount of teams, but that's still, we got to win what's in front of you.
It's still, that's the thing. It's just
MLB. It's the
same
thing. They've added teams, but it's still win these amount of games and you're World Series champion.
But that's why it's so much simpler with team sports, as we talked about.
Yes, but the thing is, once they implement this, everyone left. Tracks have lost so many seats. Like, they've taken away bleachers because no one's showing up. Granted, NASCAR is on an upward slate now. Darlington this past week was sold out.
Yeah, and it was To be fair, I would say that an uptick probably in maybe some social media has been able to attribute to that, trying to pull in a little bit of some younger viewers again and maybe bringing some people back into the sport, but easily not as much as they'd like to see.
No, not at all, because these people are getting their sports through social media a lot of the time.
So you're just your phone.
Yes, just your phone. NASCAR is very much not a game that can be watched through a 10-minute video on your phone. You won't have, the only people who are watching like race replays and race recaps are these diehard fans. Like, I will rewatch the races for the podcast so I get a refresher on everything that happened, because a lot happens during a race. I don't think you can have like how the NFL has the condensed versions of games, and if you're working during a race or during a game, you can go back and watch it, and it's 40 minutes, and that's fine. But the normal person isn't going to really sit and watch, or at least someone who's not a fan isn't going to just sit there and be like, okay, I have a condensed race in 10 minutes. It's like, you're not getting everything out of a sport, out of NASCAR anyway. You're not getting everything out of NASCAR that way, because there is a lot of strategy. In 10 minutes, you can't explain why Daniel Suarez was ripping around Richmond for 20 laps before he slowed down. You can't get why Kyle Busch getting passed on the last lap by Harrison Burton was such a big deal, because you have to explain, oh, well, this is how the playoffs are. And a big thing, probably one of the biggest things that I have hated about this playoff system, this win and you're in at the very least, is the fact that it seems like every race is meaningless in the form or in the grand view of the championship. So that 3-wide finish in Atlanta, amazing. But people look at it as, oh, Kyle Busch was that close to making the playoffs and continuing the streak. Darlington, oh, Kyle Busch was that close. It wasn't the fact that Chase Briscoe just won a Southern 500, possibly in the last win for Stewart Haas in the 14. It was, oh, he punched his ticket to the playoffs and jumped all these other guys. We're not talking about that fact that he just won this crown jewel race and it was the best crown jewel of the year, because the other crown jewels have been lackluster just in the way that things have ended for them. It's, okay, let's talk about who got eliminated for the playoffs. Everything is the playoffs. It's the playoffs, it's the playoffs, it's the playoffs. In the NFL, you can watch a Week 3 game and not be worried about the playoffs. You can watch, I don't know, the Seahawks winning in a Hail Mary against the Bengals, and it'd be crazy. But immediately they're not like, oh, well, now they're looking up to be It's looking up to be a great season for the Seahawks. It's like that was a crazy finish to the game, and that was an amazing game. That game, was that 2018? The Chiefs and the Rams, where it was 54-51, and like one of the craziest games. I don't think I thought about the playoffs once. It was, these teams could go to the Super Bowl, but it was mostly, this is a fantastic game. And I wish that was the same for NASCAR, but the crown jewels have their relevance, and individual races have their relevance and importance diminished because everything is just the playoffs. And it's a terrible way to grow your sport, because why should you care about one race when the playoffs are all that the sport cares about? But the drivers fail to even care that much about it. In 2020, when Kevin Harvick was eliminated, he said a sentence where, if I was an executive at NASCAR, I don't know how I'm not immediately looking to fix this. He said, these championships aren't like the ones that Petty and Earnhardt used to win. One of your sports Hall of Famers is saying that about your sport, and you can't see. I don't know why I'm doing this. They just cover their ears, cover their eyes, and they're like, all right, well, we got the championship next weekend. Let's get ready for whatever's going to happen. And it's awful because not even the drivers take the championship seriously. Denny Hamlin is joking about never winning a championship. He posted a video earlier where he had a piece of paper taped to his back where it's like, don't ask if it's our year, it's always our year. It's like, in a serious sport, retiring without a championship for a Hall of Famer is like gut-wrenching. So, and when a Hall of Famer finally wins a championship, it's a momentous occasion. Like, Aaron Donald got his championship before he retired. You just have these guys who it just seems like they don't care. Because it's like, would you rather win a championship, or would you rather win like Daytona 500? And some guys are going to say the Daytona 500. And it's because this championship just doesn't mean that much anymore. Mark Martin, it was gut-wrenching that he never won a championship. Now it's just like, Denny Hamlin can't win a championship, but he has 3 Daytona 500s. People talk about the Denny Hamlin championship thing, but it's mostly as a joke. It's kind of like a dunk on him, but even he doesn't seem... I don't want to say he doesn't care that much, because I'm obviously not in his brain, but it's a running joke in the NASCAR community of how he can't win a championship, instead of being, man, this is one of the greatest drivers we've ever seen. He might not win a championship. And yet you have 2015 in this system where Kyle Busch missed like half the season and still won a championship based on the elimination format. If he came back from his leg injury at Daytona and he won all those races and did really well, that's a great story. He shouldn't have been champion. At the time, I was rooting for him because my dad was a Kyle Busch fan, so I was rooting for him to win the championship. But he shouldn't have been crowned a champion for that. He should have been a great comeback story, and whoever was the best driver that year should have won. But you can miss... You don't even need to race every race. I said you could win the Daytona 500, just take a back seat the rest of the season, and then just go out and dominate in the playoffs. You don't even need to do that. You could miss half the season off an injury, win one race, and chart yourself, and then get a piece of paper that says, good job, you did it, you're in the playoffs. It's such an illegitimate system. It makes no sense for a motorsport that claims to be one of the top in the world, which it is one of the biggest forms of racing, and now we're going international again. You're going to put a product like this in front of international crowds, and they're going to be like, what are you talking about? Why? It's like, we just won. Obviously, like when we were talking about last week with Daniel Suarez going to be a favorite at Mexico, or at Mexico City. That race for Daniel Suarez is going to be bigger than the championship because he wants to win in Mexico in the NASCAR Cup Series, because that's going to be huge. But the booth at NASCAR is going to be, if Daniel Suarez wins, it'll be like, oh, he'll punch his ticket to the playoffs. It's like, NASCAR is so disconnected with what the people want, and they still wonder why they're losing all these ratings. I understand the system's outdated, the point system. Use the modern points format, the way things are scored. If you want to keep stage racing, whatever. But the playoffs, winning you're in, elimination style format, doesn't reward the best drivers. It's not going to get the best out of the drivers because they're just going to try to win one race. And it diminishes everything about the sport, about the crown jewels, about the tracks, about the history about the sport, the history of the sport. How often do you hear another sport say, oh, well, yeah, the Chiefs have just won back-to-back Super Bowls, But those Super Bowls don't count like the 80s because the way they determine a champion is different. It's like they don't. It's because it'd be a stupid argument. But in NASCAR, it's like, oh, Jimmy Johnson won 7 championships, but it's not the same as Dale Earnhardt. It's like, yeah, you got a point. It's a completely different system and a completely different era with more talent, but he doesn't have to be as consistent. It makes no sense. If you want a playoff system, 2011 Chase was perfect. This win and in format, it's stupid. And it's if you want the sport to grow, you have to get rid of the playoff elimination format.
I feel like that's an opinion that is definitely shared, at least in terms of, everything with the fandom, for folks that have watched NASCAR a long time and have gone into it and tried to go to bat for their opinions on social media and, even just trying to express themselves to NASCAR as much as possible, even the drivers as well. It's not just the fans, it's a lot of the drivers as well, at least from what we've come to understand. So it is still what we're stuck with right now. Obviously, regardless of what happens, fans are still going to be around, but in terms of growing that fan base, perhaps maybe a change would need to be in order, but this is what we got with right now. We're still going to continue to enjoy it, to support the sport, support the drivers, and only hoping for brighter things in the future and for more eyeballs to continue to be on the sport, and maybe for, the NASCAR brass to continue to listen more to drivers and fans moving forward. But I think it's about time to cool it down and close it out.
One last thing. It'll be short, I promise.
Go ahead.
Do you know the Factory of Sadness video, the Browns fan?
Factory of Sadness.
It's a guy standing outside of the stadium. I'll show it to you after we're done recording. He's standing outside the stadium, and he goes on a 2-minute rant of just nonstop. And he's like, you know how hard it is to be this consistently bad. You're an embarrassment. You're a factory of sadness. And he goes on this long rant about how much he hates the team and how sad they make him. He takes a deep breath, and at the end of the video, he goes, I'll see you next week.
Yeah,
That's how I feel with NASCAR. It frustrates me so much, but I still love this sport. I love the drivers. I love what this sport could be, and I think that's why it gets me so heated, is because I know this sport can be great. They just make some decisions that are baffling to a majority of people, except the people making this decision.
Yeah, it just makes it a little bit more complicated, and that's still where we're at right now. But, we will continue to watch, we'll continue to make our picks, and we'll continue to love racing. So we don't know where things are going to be, the next few years down the road. Maybe changes will be made again. Maybe, things will happen where they feel the desire to want to reformat things back to how it was closer to 2010, 2011, but we don't know. We'll see what's going to go on, but of course, appreciate everyone for listening to us this far into this point of the podcast, and thank you again for pulling in to the Palmetto Pit Stop with the longer rants. That was Adam. I'm Tony. We'll see you next time.
Tune in next week when our brackets are completely destroyed.
Yeah, we'll see.